sorry, I got delayed because of some internet issues. I'm sorry. Yeah.
That's all right. We all have these, especially these days with the rains coming in. So welcome everyone. I see there's a long list of participants have joined. We have about 134. Really excited. My name is Pankaj Doshi. I'm from class of 94, and I came back to get MTech, so you can say 97 too. I work in the space of developing new drugs. And I'm really excited to kick off this panel discussion series. And before we kind of go further into the topic at hand, let me just give you a very short background. So, this series came about through discussion among few IITB CHE alumni of 90s. And the idea was, there's always this thought of contributing back to IIT and help achieving its mission of, making it a teaching and research institute of excellence, and to continue to make national and what is the area we want to pick. And we want to sort of retouch upon some of the core areas which really defined IITs. Of course, IIT students have done amazingly great in many areas, but let's not forget that a lot of IITians, and some of whom have joined generously in this discussion, have done amazing impact in some of the core areas relates to things which are very important for us. And we are kicking off this series. The plan is to have once in every 3 or 4 months, but we'll pick up topics where chemical engineers have traditionally done really well. Of course, it's a field which changes dramatically, so we are not fossilized. There are new things which we have done. How do you combine those and make an impact? So we'll look at all those. Today's event, we will focus on life science and the pharmaceutical industry. And I think with the backdrop of pandemic, which is still ongoing, it's quite clear to us that while these events will be very difficult to manage, but one thing which we need to have is the role of science and technology. I mean, without that, and as everybody has seen how pharmaceutical life science industry has they rose up to the challenge and provided, be it vaccine, be other medication. Of course, this challenge is still around us, especially where I am in India. We're still dealing with it, but nonetheless, it is something where chemical engineers, especially in making medicine available to large masses, play an important role. And we will hear a lot more about that. And that's really what we want to explore. And then we want to focus on how all this knowledge reservoir which exists among IIT alumni, how can that be helped to the institute? What can we do in order to make them aware opportunities which lie, where are the impact? And it could be global impact, it could be national impact. So those are the kind of things we want to discuss. And I hope that this eventually leads to a sort of creation of ecosystem where we come back and discuss in many different areas, be it sustainability or be it water issues, be energy, or anything you can imagine where chemical engineers, especially from IIT Bombay, have played a big role. So with that, what I like to do is I like to start introducing this distinguished panel. First and foremost, I'm going to go by the age. Sorry, Madhu, I don't think that's the way, but let me just pick it up. So we have Madhu Balachandran from class of 73. And when I looked at his CV, it just reads, he's been with pretty much every major pharma. Currently, he's on the board of Catalent, and also he's a chief operating officer of a very interesting company named Nutcracker Therapeutics, and really doing some amazing stuff. But before we get into all those amazing things, I also want to say that a big chunk of career Madhu has spent at Amgen, another really innovative company which came on the west coast of US in early 80s or late 70s. So before going too further into that, let me just bring up and ask Madhu to present his perspective as a chemical engineer, briefly describe, how did he grow into the roles he have taken and his training, and what set him apart from a lot of other peers, or how did, all the things you have done. So maybe Madhu, why don't you provide your perspective? And then I think we want to explore how these roles have changed, because you have seen industry from late 70s all the way to current time. So I'm really keen to hear your perspective on that.
Okay, well, good morning or good evening. To most of you in India, it's evening, I realize. In California, where I am, it's still early, 7 a.m. Thank you for introducing me, Pankaj. Just one small correction. I'm even older than you think I am. I graduated in 1972, not 1973.
Okay. Well, the kind of things you have done doesn't say anything. You might be graduated in 80s for all I know.
Yeah, I'm a generation removed from most of you, or few generations removed from most of you. I left India right after graduating and went to the State University of New York in Buffalo to get my master's. And then while I was working, I got my MBA. I've spent my whole career in the pharmaceutical and biotech industries, over 40 years now. The first half was in conventional organic synthesis of conventional small molecule pharmaceuticals in North Carolina. And my career has been primarily in engineering, factory design and factory operations, and manufacturing and supply chain and process development, those kinds of disciplines. And I was fortunate to have worked for Amgen in the second half of my career. I retired from Amgen as the head of operations 4 years ago, but I was keen to remain involved in the industry and really didn't want to disappear precipitously from the work that we do. So I sought opportunities on boards, and I was fortunate to get a few board appointments. One was with, as you mentioned, Catalent, which is a contract development manufacturing organization. I'm also on the board of a gene therapy company in Boston called Unicure, which is developing a gene therapy for hemophilia B to replace faulty factor 9 genes. I'm on the board of a cell therapy company here where I live called A2 Biotherapeutics, which is modifying T cells through CAR T approaches. And I'm on the board of an Italian company in Venice. They make medical devices and syringes and vials, and they've been very active in the pandemic, as you can imagine, supplying vials and syringes because that was in short supply. And a year ago, I joined as a chief operating officer, as you mentioned, of an mRNA company called Nutcracker Therapeutics, where they're innovating in the field of mRNA and combining it with microfluidics, because mRNA has the biological feature that small amounts of mRNA can be converted to large amounts of protein inside the cell. So in general, you can supply an mRNA therapeutic in small doses, and it lends itself to microfluidic manufacturing. So we're trying to take advantage of that biological feature and apply it as a platform. So that's been my career trajectory so far. And a lot of what I learned in IIT Bombay certainly has been useful, primarily by your fundamentals, even though I was never very good at it while I was there. And sometimes when I think of, I wake up at night with nightmares of not being ready for exams, as I imagine most of you go through that too. I remember at IIT, we never studied on time, and it was always at the last minute. And I don't think things have changed very much. But when I was there, it was 5 years. Now I understand, unfortunately, it's become 4 years. Much of what I learned stood me in good stead. The basics of, the heavy grounding in mathematics, physics, chemistry, transport phenomena, and that most dreaded subject of all, thermodynamics. Surprisingly, I found really helped me. Not that I applied all of it, but it helped your apprehension of the problems you're working on. There are many disciplines and subjects that, in retrospect, I wish I had been exposed to, and I've lost track of what the curriculum looks like now in IIT Bombay or the other IITs. But when we get around to discussing it, Pankaj, one of the things I would like to ask Professor Venkatesh is whether some of these subjects that I now wish I had been exposed to, which would have increased my understanding on the basis of first principles, would have helped a lot in my career. And as I advance in age, as you can imagine, my ability to learn diminishes. But what I grasp most easily are areas of knowledge that are founded on the things I learned at IIT. Those I can grasp easily. So my appeal then would be in the evolving area of life sciences, where things are changing so much, especially in biology, that chemical engineers be given the opportunity to be educated in principles of biology, which by most accounts, this century is going to be the century of biology. So I'll stop there because I know you have to go on to other panelists.
I think you brought in a lot of interesting elements, especially for the latter half when we start thinking what can be influenced in the teaching and research. And we want to hear what they're doing. I think they already changed, and Venkatesh is probably one of the key person behind that. So we'll come to that. So I want to move to my next panelist, Dr. Arun Chandavarkar. He's the Managing Director of Biocon Biologics. And prior to that, he retired as CEO of Biocon. I think Arun has a very interesting career path. After IIT, he went to MIT to work with Professor Charles Cooney, and sort of preparing for this this discussion series, I kind of looked at what did he do for his PhD. Not that I was checking on it, but I just want to understand where did the idea came to work in the space of biotherapeutics, biologics, because that wasn't fashionable in 80s. The industry was just coming out. And I realized he did work on protein purification, a very, very important problem in designing large molecular drugs, antibodies, monoclonal antibodies, proteins, enzymes, you name it. And the fact that he came back to India right after his PhD says a lot. To be in the Boston area is a place you want to be if you want to work in the space of the life science. So he came back, but then he really contributed immensely to Biocon, which is truly a pioneer industry in India in the space of biosimilar. What they have contributed, that says a lot about, and I'm assuming, and Arun will tell more, that the company grew with him pretty much because he's been there pretty much at the inception, and of course leadership of Kiran Majumdar Shah. So Arun, please tell us your story. And I think you've been fairly technical in your career, at least in the early part, I'm assuming. So we'd like to hear how as a chemical engineer really helped you out in that space.
So thanks, Pankaj. And as you rightly said, I began my career coming back to India. So when you talk about, pivotal moments, I think that is one of the pivotal moments in terms of a direction that a career takes. That rather than following the conventional wisdom of, staying back in the US after a PhD and working for the giants of today, like what Madhu said, Amgen or Pfizer or Lilly or any of these companies in the US, I chose to come back. And the company I joined at that time was not in the area of pharmaceuticals. So that is one thing. So the underlying common theme that in terms of the interest that I always had was actually biotech. I first of all want to acknowledge my professor from IIT Bombay, Arvind Kurchatkar, who is also on this panel tonight. I mean, he is there in the audience tonight. I saw his message on the chat. So Professor Kurchatkar, nice seeing you after so many years. Then I, of course, as you mentioned, my BTech thesis, if you will, or BTech project was also in the area of fermentation. Of course, at that stage, IIT Bombay did not have any infrastructure or any courses in biotech. So essentially, I had to bootstrap and decide what I had to do as part of that project. Likewise, you'd be surprised to know that when I joined MIT, today when you think of MIT as the premier institute, one of the top institutes, in this, and you alluded to, people in biotech wanting to be in Boston or Cambridge today, you talk of Kendall Square and, talk of all the giants who are present today. When I was a PhD student at MIT, Kendall Square was a desolate area full of warehouses, decrepit warehouses. People used to get scared to go there at night. The only 2 or 3 biotech companies, if you will, that were present in that area were just starting their lives. One of them was, of course, Biogen. The other was Genzyme. There was Genetics Institute. There were a handful of such companies out there. And none of them had made it big in the sense that none of them actually had a product on the market at that stage. So we were all actually growing. If you look at MIT itself, when I joined, I think a couple of years after I joined, we actually commissioned our first pilot plant for biotech products at MIT. So, even that didn't exist at that stage. And I know MIT did get a contribution from one of the equipment suppliers, and, they were instrumental in setting up that kind of a pilot facility where we could try out many of the engineering concepts at pilot scale. Otherwise, prior to that, most of our work was actually restricted to lab scale, sort of work, whether it's for PhDs or research-based projects. Then, as you said, that I came back and joined Biocon. Biocon was actually an enzymes company at that stage. Enzymes are, of course, the link to biotech was, of course, enzymes are proteins. Enzymes are made by fermentation. But if you look at what we did as fermentation those days, Biocon's manufacturing technology to make enzymes was what is called solid state fermentation or surface fermentation, where you grow fungal cells on the surface of a solid matrix, which in this case was sterilized wheat bran, where the sterilized wheat bran would provide the nutrients and the fungal cells would grow on that. So it's very easy to design fermenters when they are stirred tank. You can use all your concepts of thermodynamics and fluid mechanics, heat transfer, KLA equations and all that. I was hard pressed to find any mathematical models when it came to surface fermentation. So essentially we had to do a lot of that kind of, design, combining theoretical knowledge, empirical knowledge. A lot of it was just, practical experience of doing it, failing and doing it again. So most of my learning actually in Biocon has been by doing rather than by theory. We went from surface fermentation of enzymes to stirred tank fermentation of enzymes. We went from fungal fermentations to microbial fermentations. We then expanded our horizons from enzymes to small molecule APIs by fermentation. Even today, we are one of the largest producers of cholesterol drugs, immunosuppressants, and a few other small molecules by fermentation. We then broadened from, and these small molecule drugs were made by, not by recombinant organisms. They were made by highly mutated natural organisms. And then we branched off into recombinant microbial products. And the first products we picked were recombinant human insulin. This was way back in early 2001, I think, that we started this program. And then we branched off from insulins into other microbial products, then into antibodies with cell culture. And unlike most companies in India which start their career as generics or biosimilars and then get into innovation and novels, for us it was actually the other way around. The initial set of products that we started working on were all novel molecules, like an anti-EGFR mAb, an anti-CD6 mAb, then later on we broadened into fusion antibodies. But having built a lot of this, and since the risk appetite in terms of risk investment available in India is limited, we were willy-nilly forced to what we call earn while you learn. So to earn, we had to get into businesses where you can get revenues quickly and then plow back the profits from that into growing your business. So which is why we grew our portfolio of generics, portfolio of biosimilars. Now, of course, that has taken a life of its own. And, we are one of the only companies, I think, from this part of the world to have actually 5 biosimilars approved in Europe and 3 approved in the US. 3 approved and launched in the US. So that's sort of been my journey. As you said, I've grown with the company. I basically my role straddled everything that Biocon does, because when you join a startup, you essentially have to be a jack of all trades, whether it's business development, R&D, operations, you name it, you have to do it all. So essentially, that's been my learning.
This is really fascinating. I wish, or I hope, that when you really retire, you'll write a memoir and you'll go through all these interesting experiences as a chemical engineer. And I'll look forward to that. Maybe I'll place a pre-order for that book in case you plan to write. But let's move on to our next panelist, and let's finish the industry panelist first, and then I'll come to the academic expert. So here's Vipin, and Vipin and I go a long way. We had a couple of years overlap, and he was a next wing. Of course, Vipin was always, I have to say, very academically oriented. And I think his current success as the chief data and analytics officer were probably written in those days. And Vipin had a very interesting journey before he came to life sciences. So he went to Larry Biglia's lab at CMU. And I think people who have followed chemical engineering profession and academic side of things, folks know that CMU had a very strong systems program. And before analytics became cool and sexy, folks at CMU were building algorithms to analyze data coming from refinery. They were looking at a lot of information. And that sort of also talks about chemical engineering as a very big tent discipline. We do so many more things. So I'd like to hear from Vipin, starting from CMU and then, Honeywell and your experience in a lot of insurance giants, and then coming to Lilly. And of course, you spent time in UTC, which is a completely different domain. So you've been really jack of so many different trades and doing so many interesting things. Share your journey as a chemical engineer, as a system engineer, a data analytics group, whatever you want to call. You had so many different hats. So it's all to you, Vipin.
Thank you, Pankaj. It's such a pleasure to be on the panel today with such distinguished panelists, fellow panelists. I also see, a few names from the faculty members who actually taught me while I was there. Professor A.K. Suresh, Professor K.P. Madhavan, I believe Professor Kucharkar is also there. So first of all, I want to thank them for and of course my fellow classmates and so on and so forth for giving me the foundations that has helped me in what I would say being a diverse, having a diverse set of experiences in my career. So I did my PhD, as Pankaj mentioned, with Larry Bigler in the area of large-scale nonlinear optimization and differential algebraic equations. So what I, in my training during my PhD, I also picked up more on the applied math side with chemical engineering applications. My entire career, one common thread across the 25 years is being in data analytics. I would say even before it became fashionable in different industries. After I finished my PhD, I went to Honeywell at the corporate research center that supported all of Honeywell's businesses. So I worked on, from a chemistry perspective, control and optimization of refineries, but I also worked on many aerospace related problems where you apply optimization and control. And after that, I had the opportunity to go lead the corporate modeling and analysis team at United Technologies Corporation. Now it is called Raytheon Technologies. But UTC was the parent company of Pratt & Whitney and Otis Elevators, Carrier HVAC, Sikorsky Helicopters. And that also actually gave me a very different perspective on problem solving, helping with the toughest engineering problems across many diverse set of businesses. So having spent more than a decade in industrial conglomerates like Honeywell and United Technologies, I actually took a detour in my career. I had the opportunity to go build an analytics function in a Fortune 100 healthcare company, Cigna Healthcare. health insurance company. And that healthcare was totally new to me. I did not know much about healthcare, but I was passionate about building a team and using analytics to make a difference in the business. So I went and worked for Cigna Healthcare, and that is the start of my journey in the healthcare space. And then after that, I moved to Humana. It's a Fortune 50 health insurance company as well, and led the journey of sort of analytics transformation of at Humana, being from a core insurance company to a company that is more running a business with data analytics. And then I moved to my current role at Eli Lilly. And part of my responsibility at Lilly is also transformational scope. One part of my role is to really transform the data environment in pharma companies. As you all know, there's a tremendous amount of data that's being generated in the pharma industry, but not much of it is actually used to the extent it could be. So there is a need, there is still a need to manage our data in such a fashion that the value of that data could be maximized. So that's one part of my responsibility. The other part of my responsibility is to build advanced analytics capabilities like AI, ML, natural language processing, etc., for use across the pharma value chain. And one may think that some of these apply in the drug discovery space, but I would say that across that spectrum of discovery to commercialization, there are tremendous opportunities for using AI, ML in really transforming the industry in many different ways. So so that's my journey. And again, one of the things being a chemical engineer that I feel is the and the training that I got at IIT and CMU really helped me to be have a diverse set of skills, having that multidisciplinary perspective, and being able to traverse multiple industries. And I'm really delighted to be back in the life sciences space, where I could use my chemical engineering skills as well as the systems/applied math skills that I picked up along the way.
Vipin, this is fascinating. I mean, I could also envy your role. I deal with data in small molecule space, and I'm putting my hair out. I think you've already done your bit of that, but I think you are looking at data coming from early space, genomic data, all the way to patient data. It spans, and it's amazing. I'm sure you're super excited to see what value proposition you can pull out from this humongous amount of data generated in pharma industry. So moving on, I think let's have a flavor from academic side. We have Professor K.V. Venkatesh from IIT Bombay. Venkatesh and I go a long way. I was his first BTech student. I don't know whether he's thrilled about that, but nonetheless, that's how it is. I was his also MTech student. And I think it's really interesting to see. So he did his PhD at Purdue. He was a biochemical engineer designing hollow fiber reactors when he came to IIT. And I think he started transforming himself from a biochemical engineer to start really some serious research in fermentation at IIT. As Arun was saying, nothing was there back in the day. So this was, I think, mid-90s. Transition to systems biology, published some amazing papers in PNAS, really top of the line. And then he decided that it's enough now. He wants to be an entrepreneur, and now he's a successful entrepreneur with a very interesting company in drug discovery. So a lot of interesting stuff you've done. Please share with us, and we'll pardon you for getting your BTech from IIT Madras. Okay, I wish you had come to IIT Bombay. Nonetheless, it's all yours. I think you're on mute.
Yeah. It's a pleasure to be, a part of this panel discussion and be with, all the leading experts from the industry. So my journey has been, I'm a chemical engineer from IIT Madras, like Pankaj introduced. Then I went to Purdue and did my PhD, hardcore biochemical engineering. And I had not taken biology. My biology was only till 10th. And when I went to Purdue, I started taking genetic engineering courses, how to do mutations in the lab. So it all started at Purdue, trying to appreciate the complexity of biology, and took up a project on fermentation, how to convert whey to various compounds of interest, bulk compounds of interest. And when I landed back as faculty at IIT Bombay, obviously, like Arun indicated, there were very little facilities for biotech kind of work, biochemical engineering. Although some work was being done by Professor Shankar and Professor A.K. Suresh, who were doing some fermentation kind of projects. So I picked it up from there and got into metabolic engineering. And because the facilities were had to be built, I started modeling and applying my chemical engineering, reaction engineering, transport ideas into modeling biological systems. Okay? And later, this was termed as systems biology. So I had entered systems biology before even the word was sort of coined, just because I started applying chemical engineering principles to model biological systems. So started modeling yeast systems to start with, and then later moved on to human systems. So we looked at metabolism, liver metabolism, how hormones regulate different physiology, and that is how the modeling complex systems with first principles, not using absolutely data, but using first principles, but still integrating omics data like genomics, proteomics, and metabolomics. Integrate them and then develop these physiological models. This is what I started doing, and then we got interested in disease modeling. So we started with diabetes, then IBD, arthritis. So we started developing several disease models, which may now be helpful in clinical data analysis. And because these were first principles, it gave insights into how the physiology works, what are the limiting factors. So that was my major research growth that I did. Essentially graduating close to now 40 PhD students who are in different places abroad in India, in industry and in academia. And so that is always being an academician, that gives us a pleasure that our students are doing very well, right? After they graduate and they get trained, right? So that is a job satisfaction that we get as academicians. Yeah? And then I became head of the department about 8 years back. Then I for 3 years I was in the academic position of heading the department. So after I ended my term, so I was thinking, should I continue being in the comfort zone and graduate PhD students, publish papers, or I need to do something different? And I saw that I had a repertoire of these models that we had validated using clinical data, using the biological knowledge. We had developed these first principle models. So that is when I started this company with my students called Medflex Research Private Limited. So what we do is we use these models, or even develop, because we have the expertise of developing models from first principles. So any disease or any physiological conditions, we very quickly can develop models and apply this to clinical data, apply this to in the drug discovery process, rationalize the science behind many of these drugs, and also get off-target analysis. Okay, what are the off-target physiological effects that may have? So last 3 years from the company, we have been interacting with all the leading pharma companies in India now. We have and then continue to do a lot of projects and support. And now I think we can scale it to foreign shores as well, because we have demonstrated that our immune models are being used in drug discovery. Arthritis models are being used in drug discovery, right? And also many of the Indian companies who are in the nutraceutical space want to go abroad with scientific basis. So they want to go to Europe and say that this nutraceutical, has these scientific basis. So they're all doing a lot of clinical studies, and then they don't have a scientific approach in analyzing. So we are doing a lot of such projects where we take nutraceuticals and try to analyze what are their physiological effects, what are their real effects, not just go by some clinical studies, but give them a scientific basis. So that has been my journey from academician to now an entrepreneur, a startup. Just started this journey just 3 years back, and with my support with my students, I think I'm enjoying it.
Very, very fascinating. I think what you guys have shown, the 4 different trajectories, really the transition or transformational role of chemical engineers. And I think the fact that it's all based on some of the fundamentals, but of course it's gone in different direction. So, what I like to propose, maybe have some brief comments on one question. So how do you foresee what are the challenges and opportunities for chemical engineers in pharmaceutical value chain? And looking forward, so where you're coming from, be it in small molecule space where you can make technology even more efficient, bring drugs to masses, and especially that's more relevant for us, a developing country like ours here, or in biologic sense, where again the same challenge, biosimilars, bring it down in terms of access and the quality remains still at the top. And then new modalities, there's so many of them coming along. I think mRNA, immuno-oncology and gene therapy and so on and so forth. These are very expensive. So engineers have to play a very important role to make these accessible. So maybe take a couple of minutes, each of you, and provide your perspective. I think that's going to build us towards like the final part of our discussion, how it's going to impact education, research, and training. And as you heard from Professor Venkatesh, that a lot has changed in IT also. So I think they are ready for this transition. But let's see, we can explore some of these avenues. So Madhu, could you please go, and then we'll follow the same process, Arun, Vipin, and then we'll come to Venkatesh.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Pankaj. So in thinking about today's discussion and preparing for it, and recognizing, that there are four of us and there's only an hour or so that you've devoted to it, I just wanted to be as succinct and brief as I could. So I did spend some time thinking what might be out of my own experience. This is not, some radical thinking or out of whole cloth or anything like that, but out of my own experience and frankly, my own recent experience and trying to make a difference in the unfortunate, pandemic tragedy that's unfolding all over the world, and particularly in India. A central problem seems to me that medicines are being made, for example, by Pfizer, an astonishingly bold move on the part of Pfizer to invest in mRNA, and it helped, bring a wonderful vaccine at lightning speed. But the benefit of that vaccine is reaching a very, very small percentage of the world's population. Where on the one hand, on the other hand, mRNA has the potential to benefit the entire globe with the proper kind of thinking being brought to bear. So the challenge to the young chemical engineers in IIT Bombay and all the other IITs and all the other panelists and everybody else who's on the call today would be, how can we take advantage of the biological advantage of mRNA and its ability to, once you know the antigen, to convert it into the appropriate sequence for the protein that can then be vaccinated. The mRNA can be vaccinated, that can produce the appropriate protein and induce an immune response at extremely fast speeds. How can we take advantage of that biological feature and convert it into a manufacturing and a supply chain and a distribution advantage? So you take a country like India, maybe we could set up a distributed network of small factories optimally located all over India. Because my fear is that this pandemic is not going to vacate the world anytime soon. If not in its current version, there will be other versions. And who knows, even if this is eradicated, there might be a future emergence of another outbreak, another pandemic. So we shouldn't find ourselves in the situation we found ourselves in, the world, I mean, and India particularly. So if we had a response, an infrastructure or a response network, 2 or 3 of these small, standard, inexpensive, fast response factories distributed all across India, where if the sequence of the antigen is known, you can, at extremely high speeds, convert it into a vaccine and fill it right there and administer it within a 6-hour, so no person in the Indian population or in the United States population is more than a 6-hour or 8-hour driving distance from that factory where that vial is filled, is the challenge I've been thinking about. I don't have the answers, but it's a challenge I think that is right up the alley of chemical engineers, where it combines biology all the way to manufacturing and supply and distribution, ultimately for the benefit of the human population. So that would be the challenge I would throw out to all of us.
I think this is an exciting challenge for young minds who have wherewithal, intellectual as well as energy to take on. And I feel like IIT Bombay and other IITs, other engineers should listen to you, what you've said, and really think about it. So maybe moving on to Arun, in your opinion, and I think you've been on the ground for many years, you have developed medicines in India. How do you foresee the role of chemical engineers in this environment? And I think it's really important that what has been done at Biocon, we should have many more Biocons, be it working on mRNA technologies, be it any other. I think that the future is biologics. I think we will transition to small molecules, and that require a different level of thinking. Engineering combined with biology, combined with all the AI technologies and everything else you can imagine. So I'd like to hear your perspective about that, value proposition and where chemical engineers fit in going forward.
So Pankaj, to be honest, I do not know whether the current curriculum that chemical engineers go through, how different it is from the curriculum that I went through. If it's the curriculum that I went through, then essentially most chemical engineers would contribute largely on the process side of things or manufacturing side of things, whether it's process development or plant design or equipment design. On that type of thing, if you want to be true to your discipline. But as you know, most people in their careers are not usually true to their discipline. They would move on into management or finance or any other field that's probably of interest or where the opportunities are more lucrative. So, but since your question basically frames the question as if you are true to chemical engineering, if you are true to your field, then what are the opportunities where chemical engineers can contribute in life sciences? I think to that I mentioned already. The obvious answers are, of course, process and equipment design, plant design, modeling. All of the well-known subjects where you apply the fundamental concepts are obvious. But I also mentioned that the pharma and biotech industry, at least what I have seen of it in the past, is notorious for not applying fundamental concepts. It's notorious for not using mathematical models the way the petrochemical or many of the other polymer or some of these other industries would use. And that has to probably do with two things. One is, of course, the fact that our industry has the first unit operation at least has a lot to do with living cells and how amenable are they to modeling. The second thing is that many of the unit operations that actually are used in the processing are not given as use examples in the curriculum. For example, at least that's why I said that I don't know whether the curriculum has changed now, but many of the processes that today could be used were never used as examples where many of these concepts can be applied. So that way, then it doesn't expose the student to where they could probably contribute in their career. The second point I wanted to make was a point which I think Madhu mentioned too, is about, for example, distributed manufacturing or that kind of a concept. One of the main reasons that is easier said than done. Of course, a long way, people have come a long way with, for example, disposable reactors, scale down models and all of that, which allows you to do that without investing too much in CapEx. But the difference is that when you look at cost of goods, The cost of goods is not only related to the manufacturing aspect. A lot of it has to do with quality systems. A lot of it has to do with validation. A lot of it has to do with regulatory oversight. And when it comes to the overhead associated with quality costs, regulatory costs, with site transfer, scale transfer, process changes, implementing them across multiple sites, and then getting regulatory approvals in every country that you are present in, that is really the biggest driver of the barrier to many of these changes. So the biggest thing that I learned, not as a chemical engineer, but I learned being in the business, moving from an enzymes company to a pharma company. The biggest learning was not the chemical engineering concepts, because that was the same whether I made enzymes or whether I made insulin or whether I make antibodies. The nuances may change, but the fundamental concepts remain the same. But what changes is the regulatory aspect. What changes is the microbiology aspect, the environment controls, the aseptic processing concepts, the validations, all of these concepts are what one never gets exposed to in a curriculum. And these have a big role where actually engineers can play, because engineers can actually adopt concepts like quality by design. Engineers can adopt mathematical models to justify to regulators why certain process changes or critical control points matter, why others don't. How you can change site, change processes by simulating processes rather than by actually running expensive validations. So there's a lot that can be done on the quality and regulatory side, which I feel actually is the big cost driver. So I think I'll pause here. There's a lot more I can say, but in the interest of time, let me pause here with this example.
I think you provide excellent insight how a pharma industry, a life science industry operates in India. There are challenges, goes beyond, and it also speaks to what we'll cover probably in the next question, that what should be the part of the curricula. It's of course a lot of these things are important, but nonetheless one needs to also, as an engineer, needs to learn about other aspects beyond engineering concepts. So I want to sort of move to Vipin's take on this, because I think you are working in a space which actually brings efficiency, brings more value out of it. And actually, of course, there is a hardware part, but there's a lot which can be done using the information we've already generated. So where do you see chemical engineers properly trained contributing to pharma value chain?
Pankaj, let me sort of maybe talk a little bit about what are the key metrics for the pharma industry, right? So of course, pharma and life sciences companies produce life-saving medicines, make a huge difference in the society, but there is a lot more work to be done. There are many conditions for which cures are yet to be discovered, and so it's a lot of meaningful work to be done. So I would say, when you look at the last decade or the couple of decades, there is a lot of data points that say the productivity, R&D productivity, the investments versus what is produced, has not necessarily increased over the last decade or so. So that's one of the challenge. And you can sort of double click on what does that mean. But again, I think that's one of the fundamental things that chemical engineers could make a difference in. And if you look at some of the other metrics for the industry, today it takes on an average 10 years from discovery to commercialization. And some of those we cannot cut out, but there is some work that could be done to reduce the time it takes to get the drug from discovery to commercialization. If you're saving 3 or 4 years, that is 3 or 4 years sooner that a patient can benefit from that drug. The cost of taking a drug through the whole process, on an average, it's about $2.5 billion. And now, again, sort of looking at that question and say, hey, how can we do that at a lower cost? And then when you look at the success rate of all of the molecules that enter phase 1, and then look at what eventually makes to regulatory approval and commercialization, it is just 12% today. That means that 88% of the molecules that are entering phase 1 fail at some point of time. So there are many questions that underlie these metrics. If you take the last one, how can we be as an industry and researchers of this industry could make better judgments and decisions on what molecules to take forward and be able to predict the failure modes ahead of time so that you could invest in the winners eventually. So these are, I would say, at the highest levels. And in each one of those questions, you can sort of have many other sub questions. But I want to sort of tee up some of the more fundamental, higher level questions that the industry is trying to tackle that will make it much more efficient and effective in producing drugs. And related to your question around systems approach and AI ML, my hypothesis, and I may be biased being in this field for a long time, is that the amount of massive data sets that are being produced that are available in pharma industry today makes it ripe for disruption and transformation with AI ML based technologies. And some of the fundamental problems are being addressed today. I mean, some of you may have heard about recent news about Google's or DeepMind's DeepMind coming up with a solution to predict protein structures. I mean, this is such a fundamental issue. There are, I believe, 20 or millions of proteins that we know about, but very few of them we know what their structures are. And it takes meticulous lab work to understand and learn about their structures to really act on some of this knowledge. But when you're bringing in, when some of these problems are being addressed with AI ML technologies, like in many other industries, you are actually enabling a lot of the foundational questions to be answered in a meaningful way. And I do believe chemical engineers are well positioned to solve these things. Why do I say that? I don't think anybody will disagree if I say chemical engineers are the most versatile engineers that are there.
Not on this panel, for sure.
Not on this panel, right? So, and what it actually takes to solve some of these questions, yes, of course, it takes depth, but it also takes an interdisciplinary mindset and training to solve some of these problems. So yes, and we'll sort of get to the curricular aspect of things. But again, there are meaningful, meaty problems across the pharma value chain that are to be solved, and I do think that the opportunities to make a difference are huge, especially for chemical engineers.
So I think you provided an amazing perspective. I have a couple of questions, but before I go there, I would request all of you if you can hang on for another 15 minutes. We're having such a great time. And of course, people online, there's a great conversation. So if you don't have any hard stop, if you can extend by 15 minutes, do stay. I want to hear from you how we can modify the curriculum. And that sort of goes to, so a couple of things which came out, Venkatesh, I think Arun said about the curriculum, and I know it has transformed quite dramatically. I mean, of course, I haven't seen it, but seeing the work coming out from IIT Bombay, Chemical and other departments, you are bringing in more biology, you're bringing in more life science aspects. So could you speak towards that? And then we'll kind of move to the last phase, which is how do we bring this conversation? How do we strengthen this conversation, industry and academia, and try to look at problem statement, which, as Vipin just said, meaty problems. Can we bring them? So we have better trained students coming out, and they probably will attack those problems. So I think there's a lot to be done. Please go ahead.
Yeah. So I think the department has changed quite a bit from a undergraduate kind of training to a very heavy postgraduate training, right? So now we have close to 250 PhD students at any given time. So that's a large number. That means that there is a more focus towards research, and this is where a lot of biology and other kind of knowledge bases are being is being transmitted. So they may come as chemical engineers, but in their post graduate, either being MTech or PhD, so that they gain a lot of biology knowledge, because they're close to half the department, now working in some biological, related problem. It may be microfluidics, it may be molecular simulations, right? Protein structure, data analytics, metabolic engineering, right? So genetic engineering, biotransformations. So all this is happening in the department, and all this in the postgraduate. So we do give some knowledge in the BTech. So as electives, so there are biochemical engineering, systems biology, computational biology. All this is offered to undergraduates as well as an elective course. But in a very structured manner for the postgraduate, obviously, they get a lot more biology knowledge base, right? So there are people, chemical engineers who come and then start looking at fundamentals of biology, how CAR-T cells work, for example, how that can be modeled, how the processing of CAR-T cells, in bag reactors, how can that be optimized? So these kinds of things, you cannot imagine before. But now, we do have projects of this kind. We do have training at the postgraduate where, these kinds of questions are asked, right? From fundamental, like, for example, how a bacteria moves or how evolution, gives an advantage to an organism. So from there to, actual applied questions, right? In terms of diagnostics, in terms of, all different aspects of pharma and life science applications. So that is happening, but obviously more can be incorporated, and then probably more structured changes can be brought in the curriculum. So those possibilities are there. And we also have a life science department, which, our students can go and take courses where, they do get fundamental knowledge in biology. So that opportunity is also there. There is a minor course where the undergraduates can go and do some 4 or 5 courses in biology and get a minor degree. So those options are also there for students to gain, if they want, extra biology knowledge.
So I think you've sort of addressed what both Madhu and Arun was talking about, bringing more biology in the curricula for chemical engineers. But what I want to get on to is, okay, so we have this reservoir knowledge, there's a lot happening in IIT. So IIT is positioned to be more dynamic with the curricula, with the research and training. They have a lot of graduate students coming in, unlike in the past, so they can really make a contribution. But I think we need to build this bridge. And maybe what I like, Madhu, going beyond mRNA, there's so many therapies coming out and they're super expensive. You would very well know, all these immuno-oncology therapy, gene therapy. I mean, these are, the price tags are absolutely mind-boggling, even for a country like US. And a lot of this has to do with innovation engineering, right? For gene therapy or for you're really dealing with individual patient cells and growing. Where do you see, and sort of expanding, when will we get to see the benefit of all this amazing science done in 50 years for folks who may not have the opportunity to see it at the current space? So talk a little bit more about it, how it can influence curricula in IIT Bombay, where of course they are doing a lot, as was said, but they need to do a little bit more, be more aware where the challenges lie, how they can bring these therapies in this space. So I'd like to hear a little bit more on that from you.
Okay, thanks again. So again, Pankaj, thanks in advance for sending, thank you for sending us the questions in advance. I had the opportunity to think a little bit about this topic. I was first, I just want to say that I was struck by the congruence of what I had listed by way of curriculum that I had not been exposed to when I was at IIT Bombay, and what Arun said in some of his remarks about what he had not been exposed to either, and the kinds of disciplines that he, once he started his career, had come across and recognized what he needed to grow and develop in, very similar to my own experience. And I just want to restate some of them if they're not part of the undergraduate curriculum. If there's a way to include them, it would, I think, be beneficial for future chemical engineers in the field of life sciences to develop medicines more efficiently, more effectively. Many of the things he said, nucleic acids, better ways of purification, aseptic operations, regulatory advances, and the like. But coming back to your question about, what are the things that can be done by chemical engineers to innovate so that the manufacture of medicines can be more efficient, thereby reducing the cost of manufacture of some of these advanced modalities, which are frightfully expensive and frankly unaffordable even for the affluent West. And you also asked me to project when that might occur, when these medicines will in fact be affordable. You know, I don't think I'm arrogant enough to venture or hazard a guess regarding that. But again, whatever I say is out of my own experience, and it's a very small base of experience and a narrow field of experience. But continuous manufacturing is one area where our industry has talked about it for a long time, but frankly, the progress has been quite disappointing. It's not because the chemical engineering discipline is not up to the task, but it's a combination of hurdles that are multidisciplinary in nature, including regulatory hurdles and medical hurdles, and not enough investment in an integrated fashion across disciplines being applied to reducing the cost by orders of magnitude through the principles of continuous manufacturing versus what we do today, which is, for the most part, there are instances of continuous manufacturing. You know, I don't want to make a blanket statement, but by and large, what we do in life sciences today is dominated by batch manufacturing. So if we could transition to continuous manufacturing, especially in biologics, maybe organic synthesis with the complexities of small molecules and organic synthesis and reaction kinetics, that might be difficult, but certainly for biologics, for antibodies, for bispecific antibodies, for a number of different proteins, those processes are eminently amenable to continuous manufacturing. And of course, then you still have the problem of filling, formulation and filling, because most of these are injectables. But that's a separate problem that can also be dealt with to reduce the cost of manufacture. So I would just stop there because, as Arun said, we could talk for hours and days on all the challenges and opportunities that could benefit from intelligent chemical engineering application. But continuous manufacturing is one that occurs to me as young chemical engineers, bright minds from IIT Bombay and other IITs could apply themselves to, and it would be a huge benefit for the industry as a whole and society in general.
So I'm really happy you brought the term continuous manufacturing. It's hard to imagine 5 chemical engineers and so many more online talking and not at least uttering the word continuous manufacturing. Is pretty hard, close to my heart since I work on it. But I think, so these are the kind of, insights which should be provided to students. And I like to take what Arun was saying earlier. So coming back to manufacturing in India, the continuous manufacturing is a challenge. And then of course, some of the things you said are not a typical, not a part of typical chemical curriculum, but of course they're important, right? How do you do aseptic manufacturing? How do you take care of regulatory burden? I feel like if we want to train students to go in this space, they need to be aware that it's not just about doing the reactor or about collecting data or building a model. There's a lot more to it. And maybe some opportunity, maybe from practitioners, because there's not something in a space where academicians are working on or they can be trained. This is, you learn by, as you initially said, right? So you just sort of learn it on the job. So please talk about, how that knowledge can be brought to students and who are made aware that there are opportunities and these are challenges and this is something you need to combine.
Is that addressed to me?
Yes, of course. I mean, yes, please.
Okay. I'll just take off from where Madhu left off, because that is an interesting point. And because I was also looking at, what are the new technologies that people talk about? Continuous manufacturing was one of them. I know from an FDA perspective, they were looking at process analytical technologies, or PAT as they call it. Then if you look at from a small, especially from a small molecule, may not be so much from a biotech perspective, but you have things like simulated moving bed chromatography, which is like quasi, continuous. Now, one of the challenges with continuous manufacturing, which maybe chemical engineers need to address, is that if you want end-to-end chemical engineer, end-to-end continuous process, every unit operation must be amenable to a continuous process. Otherwise, what will you have is that you'll have breaks in between, because there are unit operations in between which are batch. And then that doesn't serve the purpose. So the challenge that industry has faced is that to implement continuous manufacturing, it's difficult to implement it only for one unit operation if the one before and the one after is batch. So that, because I myself have looked at it in Biocon, we've looked at, in fact, most of the cutting edge technologies, we've had the leeway to evaluate, look at it, work with vendors who do this. But the challenge has been not being able to implement it necessarily at commercial scale is for these reasons. I'm not getting into the regulatory reasons because those are challenges anyway obvious. The second thing I would like to make is that to some extent, Biocon did have continuous or does have molecules quasi-continuous manufacturing. For example, if you look at perfusion as a fermentation, it is something like a feed and blade where you run perfusion fermenters for 2-3 months at a time, for a batch. So that those kind of perfusion technologies are well established, and used for monoclonal antibodies. So that is done. But,
can you just, sorry, I just want to interrupt, sorry. So I think you brought these aspects. Do you think these are only growing in industry, or academic research is also focused on that? How this knowledge has been presented as a problem statement to academic universities and students? Where do you see students coming in? Are they better trained than what you had in these technologies, which can make some contribution to all the things you're saying?
No, see, I do not know whether there are projects in any, I'm not talking about IIT Bombay in particular, I'm talking about any engineering school.
Right,
because, it's not nothing to do with IIT Bombay. It could be Caltech, Stanford, MIT, or anywhere.
Okay.
I've not seen too many projects where there's a focus on, for example, continuous manufacturing of other unit operations, whether it's lyophilization, whether it is high pressure chromatography. Like, for example, a product like an insulin uses a lot of HPLC based purification steps, which is not easily amenable to simulated moving bed chromatography also, because simulated moving bed also right now is more used in low pressure chromatography kind of systems. Then you have other unit operations like centrifuges, which to some extent can be, semi-continuous, as I, said. But and all of this has to be maintained in a continuous operation in a sterile way. Like, you cannot break sterility if you're saying you have to run a process continuously for 1 month, 2 months, 3 months. It has to be done aseptically for that longer period. So the aseptic process design, aseptic equipment design, the use of materials that can withstand this kind of aseptic, barriers is another sort of a challenge. So these are all problem statements, but I'm not sure which is the right forum to address. Is it an undergraduate students who have to address it? Is it postgraduate students, or is it companies spun out from engineering schools which then build on this, concept? I'm not very sure, which is the right place, because you cannot do this as a BTech project. It has to be done as a something that can be tomorrow implemented, if not in industry, at least at some sort of a pilot level, or
I think you have shared a lot of interesting ideas which are really faced by biological engineers when they work in this space, and I hope all the IT professors and students who are on call, they're making some note. These are the areas we want to spend a little bit more time and think. So I think I'm going to move on to Vipin, and I want to understand, Vipin, you mentioned so many opportunities. How do we realize, do you foresee that better trained engineers coming out from all over the place, not just IIT Bombay. So how should they tweak their curricula? Now, there's one risk, right? Going too deep into data science, suddenly they will start creating a ride share, which will send them to moon, or they will have a ride share other applications. So how do we manage that data science doesn't take over? Data science is important, and which you have shown so well in your career that you came from domain and then sort of expanded, and here you are. So please talk about that, right? How do we bring these things where we don't convert to something else? They still remain chemical, biochemical engineer, make a contribution, but apply the new digital technologies.
Absolutely. So when it comes to curriculum, of course, there are two things. One is content, and the other is skill set. So in a 4-year program, of course, there is limited time and bandwidth to deliver content, right? If you're delivering one content, then you probably may have to take out some of the content. But I think we got to also think about the skill set. So from a content perspective, there is a lot of belief that a lot of the innovations happening in our industry and broadly as well comes at the interface, will come at the interface of biology and technology, right? And when I say technology, when I also sort of say, broadly AI, ML, et cetera, et cetera. So I think really making sure that some of the fundamentals of biology, and it may be in the curriculum today, of course, I'm not aware of the curriculum today, but really, a lot of the discussion here goes into biology, right? So getting that fundamentals of biology is important, and also getting some of the fundamentals of some of the compute intense methodologies is going to be important, because the future is going to be driven by the combination of man and machine, right? So how do you get the talent skills to work with the machines and work with what the machines can bring to the table? So I think that is going to be important. And from a skill set perspective, the ability to be, you're going to learn something from your undergrad and your postgraduate education. But as you go into, as people go into careers, there has to be a notion of continuous learning. How do we prepare the graduates to rapidly pick up new things, even if that's not in their fields of training in their undergraduate or graduate curriculum, right? So that skill set is going to be important. And that's where I think some amount of versatility, coursework that really exposes people to pick up new things and then run with it and integrate with what they have already learned is going to be important. So again, my takeaway is the ability to be a cross-functional expert, because the areas are going to evolve in ways that we may not be able to predict today. But having that foundation to pick up new skills, but at the same time, when it comes to the specific, I do think that the compute intense and the biology aspects are going to be important. I
think that's an excellent piece of advice, because in our lifetime, I mean, nobody would have expected 2018 vaccine. It just didn't. I mean, I'm just giving one example. I'm sure there are many, many, many more. And versatility to pick up new skill is really what keeps continuous education learning is what keeps going. And I'm sure new grads probably will have that in mind. Although I hate to say that, it's the last question because we're having such a great time. But the last question comes from, there are so many questions in the chat box. I wish, I'm sure we'll email it to all the panelists. Maybe they can take it up. But that's last great question, which comes from Arun Dravid and Olina Rane, and I think it's on my WhatsApp chat from Guru for Professor Venkatesh. How do you summarize top need in life sciences? And can you comment, right? How does the curricula at IIT Bombay can take on after you're hearing all these aspects? Of course, you have done a lot, but certainly aligning with what are the needs probably will bring more value out. So could you please comment on that? And after that, I'll probably close this thing.
Yeah. So just to add, right? So we do have an introduction to biology, basic molecular biology to the BTech students. So that course is there. We do have data analytics also, and we have AI for chemical engineers. So all these three courses have already been incorporated. But at the end of the day, what are the skill sets that they get or any applications they have in mind? So I'm not very sure about it. But these courses, the course content and in the curriculum, we do have biology knowledge, data analytics, and AI for chemical engineers. So this has been incorporated, right? But I see that research, obviously, that is where one of the things where the alumni in their industry positions and all can give us feedback. And next is curriculum, right? So if we get some ideas in terms of how it can be changed, how it can be structured to the department, so that is also a positive. And probably a direct connect with the students who are interested in a particular domain, and if you are able to connect to the leaders in that particular domain, and then they get a feedback, okay, which probably is not happening. And probably this is an initiative where we can start implementing some of these things, and then thinking about some of these things where at all the three levels that in a particular domain, whether research inputs, right, and these are the key ones, problems that exist, and whether anybody can take this up, right? So that will be helpful in in the postgraduate and in the research aspects of the department and training. And next is obviously the curricula, right, and telling us how to incorporate some of these changes, right? And because we have the other departments where interdisciplinary concepts can be got by the students, because we have nano center, nanotech center, we have other centers, even management. So students can take minor courses and other courses to train themselves in many of these aspects. But it may not be very specific to pharma. I mean, that I will, because there is nothing like a curriculum or a process which is very, very specific. For example, regulatory aspects and things like that. Those are not there, in the IIT, at least in IIT Bombay. Some of the pharmacy institutes and pharmacy departments, obviously these aspects may be there. But in IIT Bombay, those aspects are not there, right? In terms of the regulatory aspects and things of that kind. So I think in all these three levels, probably such engagements would be helpful. That in a particular domain, if we are able to get some feedback on our curriculum, I think the faculty who are there attending this will also take it a point, and then we can take it up to the department and say whether we can have more engagement in a domain-specific way. Where curriculum can be updated, leaders can be connected to students who are interested in this domain, both undergraduate and postgraduate, and in research. Yeah. So I think all three would be a helpful addition.
So I think what you said, I think it really boils down to having a very strong bridge between alumni and their high altitude position and all the reservoir of knowledge they have gained, presenting to IIT, which can be distilled into coursework. And in turn, they also get to see what IIT is doing, because like industry, IIT is also evolving. And I think with that note, I hope that we continue this dialogue. I would love to hear more. I'm myself thrilled, but I'm sure everybody has other things to do. And what I want to do is just maybe share my screen, give some work. A lot of people have worked very hard from IIT Bombay to make this happen. So just give me 1 second, and I want to make sure that they get the due acknowledgement. So certainly, chemical engineering department and the head, Professor Madhu Venjamur, really was very supportive. We got great IT support from Prathamesh and Khyati. Khyati is the one who set up this Zoom call. Of course, Dean ACR's office is amazing. They are always engaging with alumni, absolutely no time. You can, if you reach out to Professor Joshi, you get response very quickly. Ravi Shankar and his team, Bhuvi and Dhananjay, I'm sure you've seen a lot of emails from Bhuvi. I think DRF team is doing an amazing job. And IITB Alumni Association, Devesh and team, they've been really excellent in spreading the word, making sure, getting the message out on WhatsApp group and making sure a lot of alumni are aware of this. And last but not least, the organizing committee. I have to really thank Guru. He's our inside man in IIT Bombay. Sanat, Jay, and Sri Singhi from 95 Batch. These are the guys who sort of got together and thought of this idea. It sort of nucleated from their RU and has taken some shape. And what we want to do is, we don't want to stop here. So this is my last slide. We plan to meet again in September. We'll have a different area, which is equally important for our life here and across the world: environment, air, and water. And I want to quote Winston Churchill. Now, this is not the end. It's not even the beginning of the end, but it is perhaps the end of the beginning. I hope we continue this dialogue. make more out of Alumni IIT Association, and probably do many, many more great things. So with that, I'd like to stop. I won't give panelists one in case they won't have one. They've been absolutely gracious with no real notice for this event. They came on board. They gave us their time and wisdom. If anybody has any last comment, by all means, before we close.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Arun, go ahead.
No, I just said thanks. Thanks. This is a good initiative. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having us. And thank you, Pankaj, for doing a great job as the moderator and for doing putting in a time to organize this. And thanks to everybody on the call as well for joining and having an interesting discussion.
Yeah, from the department, I think this was a excellent discussion that we had. I think we will also take this forward and then have more engagement in particular domain areas, and then try to see how we can improve both at research, curricula, and interaction with the students. Yeah? So we look forward to that.
So a last appeal to all the alumni who have joined and friends of IIT. You guys have been absolutely generous. Of course, you help IIT in many different ways to share your knowledge. I mean, we could not accommodate all of you. I'm sure there'll be many more panel. There are a lot more distinguished people who are online. Please reach out. I'm sure IIT will reach out to you, but let's just have this discussion ongoing. I mean, you don't want to stop at one panel discussion. So with that, I wish you all have a great day, whoever is in US and Europe, and folks in India have a great evening, or whatever else you intend to do. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Kathy, could you please stop the recording, and maybe you can just save the recording as well.
Yeah, yes, sir. I've done that.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks a lot, Kathy. We'll catch up later.
Yeah, sure, sir.